Hey there, high level listeners. We've got a new English vocabulary episode for you today. We'll be talking all about something that's close to home, literally. It's all about your neighborhood. Like always in our advanced vocabulary podcast episodes, we've got some useful vocabulary to help you navigate everyday conversations about where you live, including places like local parks, your favorite coffee shop, and the people you live close to.
Yes, we do. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us here on High Level Listening. This is our YouTube channel where we give you British and American English side by side. And as always, in these podcast episodes, we've got two scripts for you. One focuses on more American-style English with Kat from the US, and my script, which is more in British English because I'm from the UK. We'll read our scripts through each, and then we'll go back to the start and we'll break down the key neighborhood-specific vocabulary and expressions and explain them in more detail. Like always, if you want to get a PDF transcript of this episode and all our other episodes as well, you can join us as a High Level Listening member. You can see the link about how to do that in the description below. But yes, let's jump into the episode. I will ask Kat the question and she will read her script. So, Kat, what's your neighborhood like?
It is a pretty typical American suburb. There are tree-lined streets, lots of single and two-story houses with front yards, and a big community park nearby. I love starting my mornings with a walk around the park. It's got a nice paved walking trail and plenty of green space. The local coffee shop is a short walk from my place, so I like to stop in on the weekends to grab a coffee and catch up with friends. We've got a grocery store, a couple of restaurants, and even a farmer's market on Saturdays, all within walking distance. It's nice to live somewhere so convenient, especially when I want to avoid driving. And of course, I can always count on friendly neighbors waving hello as I walk by. It really feels like a close-knit community where everyone looks out for each other. All right, so I described my kind of typical suburban neighborhood in the United States. Mark, what's your neighborhood like?
I live in quite a typical area for the UK, I suppose. It's close to town, with terraced houses lining the streets and a lot of local shops just a few minutes in any direction. We've got a lovely old pub around the corner from my house where I often meet up with my mates. The high street is only a 10-minute bus ride away, so if I need to get some shopping in or pop into the post office or the bank, I can do it all in one trip. One of my favourite things is that there's loads of local shops around, like a little bakery down the road that sells really lovely bread, a few cafes, and even a butcher's that has local ingredients. We know our neighbours on both sides really well, and we even chat when we're out in the garden. All in all, it feels like there's a proper sense of community, which is something I really appreciate. Okay, so those are both our scripts. Don't worry if you didn't catch everything. We're about to go back to the start and go through them again, explaining and giving more insight into the best phrases and vocabulary. So back to the beginning. Kat, what kind of place do you live in?
So, my neighborhood is a pretty typical American suburb. There are tree-lined streets, lots of single and two-story houses with front yards, and a big community park nearby. Now, I'll be honest, this does sound exactly like a pretty typical American suburb. Now, suburb is usually kind of the bigger area with more houses and more space outside of the city. Now, when I say that I grew up in Houston, I didn't really live downtown, in downtown Houston. That's where all the big skyscrapers would be, all the high rises and things like that. There's mostly apartments, and it's very rare to find real houses in downtown areas, like in the big cities. So when we talk about wanting to live in a house, or kind of a lot of people say the American dream, it's kind of to live in these American suburbs. So these are usually about at least half an hour to an hour outside of downtown, outside of the city center, because these are big, sprawling areas of town with lots and lots of houses. Most of my students, when they think of a typical American suburb, they think space and they think big, right? So I would say that the typical American suburb would, have this big sprawling space. Some of the neighborhoods take about 5 or 10 minutes just to get out of the neighborhood by car because there's so many streets, so many areas, and you need to kind of drive slow because this is a community after all. So, my neighborhood is a pretty typical American suburb. There are tree lined streets, lots of single and two-story houses with front yards, and a big community park nearby. So, when we talk about tree lined streets, tree lined, that means that there's a line of trees, right? So, tree lined streets, lots of single story and two-story houses. That's pretty common in most suburb areas. We've got single story houses, so one story or one level, and two-story houses, which would have stairs that lead to the upstairs. So we've got downstairs, upstairs, single story house, two-story houses, a big mix. Now, it's very, very common in the United States to have a front yard and usually a backyard as well. If you live in a typical suburban area, you've got basically your house, the front area, and the back area, the front yard and the backyard. Now, a lot of countries, if they do have a front yard, they usually put a big fence or a wall, and that is not typical at all for an American suburb. An American suburb is wide open. Yes, we usually have a fence around sometimes our backyard or a fence that we have to kind of show this is the end of my lot. This is the end of my house. This starts my neighbor's house. But for the most part, they're big and open. And some people find that a little bit worrisome because they're so big and open with no fence. People could just walk in. But we're not usually that worried about that in American suburbs. So when it comes to a front yard, we like the big open space and, of course, a big community park nearby. I love the parks in the US because they usually have a pavilion area in the middle where you can go have a picnic. They sometimes have volleyball areas, soccer areas, even some of them have a baseball or basketball court as well. So a baseball field or a basketball court. It's a really great place for anyone in the community, anyone in the area to enjoy. All right, so Mark, what kind of place do you live in?
I live in quite a typical area for the UK, I suppose. It's close to town with terraced houses lining the streets and a lot of local shops just a few minutes in any direction. So the verb we've been using is I live. I live in a house, and I live in a neighborhood too. In my sentence, I live in quite a typical area. Area is another word for neighborhood. You can ask, what area do you live in? What neighborhood do you live in? If you're talking to an American, what suburb do you live in? Maybe. Yes, so I live in quite a typical area for the UK, quite a normal area. I think a lot of other people have the same neighborhood as me. It's close to town. When you come to the UK, you will not hear downtown, and you probably won't hear city centre either. Even if you live in a small village, a town, or a big, big city, the centre of that place is town. It is town. You go to town. I live close to town. I went into town. That's what we call it. It doesn't matter if it's a big place or a small one, it's town. On Saturday night, all the young people go out into town and go party. So it is the centre of wherever you live. It's close to town. So you'll hear this in the UK. It's close to town with terraced houses. Terraced houses are also very typical in the UK. England and the UK is a much smaller country, so naturally we have slightly smaller houses. Terraced houses are often 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, sometimes it's several houses, and they're connected. Their walls are connected to each other. The houses look quite narrow from the front. They're quite narrow, but they're quite deep. They go back 2 or 3 rooms, then a back garden. In America, backyard. In England, back garden. Yeah. So they're narrow houses, and you can fit a lot of people on one street with terraced houses. My mum lives in a terraced house. There are 4 or 5 houses on her side of the street. Her house is also a two-story house. There's a first floor and a second floor. And yes, that's very typical in the UK. These houses are smaller, cheaper, but still have enough space for a family or for just one or two people. So terraced houses lining the streets. So on the left side and the right side, on both sides of the street, you see terraced houses. And also, there's a lot of local shops, just a few minutes in any direction. Any direction. I can go this way and there's a shop. I can go that way and there's a shop. I can go this way and there's a shop. In any direction. A shop can be a convenience store. A corner shop is the more common phrase in the UK. A corner shop could be a small supermarket. It could be a local bakery. In any direction, I've got local shops. So that's quite a typical area for the UK, and I'd say it's quite convenient too. So back to you, Kat, back to the suburbs. What do you like to do in the mornings in your neighborhood?
Ugh, I love starting my mornings with a walk around the park. It's got a nice paved walking trail and plenty of green space. This has become kind of popular, this idea of a green space. Sometimes you might have heard the term concrete jungle, uh, referring to New York. It's kind of crazy. It's kind of hectic there, but there's no greenery. There's no trees. Everything is paved. Okay, so we do have some paved areas. So I love starting my mornings with a walk around the park. It's got a nice paved walking trail. Now, sometimes you can go through the forest and there's a walking trail, and it might just be an easy path of dirt or rocks or something that you can easily find your way. But here in the suburbs, almost everything is created, right? So it's got a nice paved walking trail. That means if something is paved, it's usually made of concrete and it's nice and smooth. And we sometimes call it a sidewalk along the side of the road. Or if it's in a community park, we might call it a walking trail. So then you would follow the paved walking trail through the park. So I love starting my mornings with a walk around the park. It's got a nice paved walking trail and plenty of green space. Now, sometimes we call them green spaces, green areas, and this is kind of the more popular thing. We want grass, we want trees, we want flowers. We don't just want to walk around, especially in the heat of Texas. We don't want to be walking around just on concrete or tar paved roads. That starts to get really hot and it's not enjoyable for anyone. So we do like to have some green spaces and some green areas where we can enjoy, or the kids can play in the grass and we're not just playing directly on the concrete, right? So Mark, that sounds really nice that you've got lots of things available to you. What kind of places are there that's really close to you?
We've got a lovely old pub around the corner from my house where I often meet up with my mates. So the best phrase, if you want to sound like a native speaker, I think a good phrase is, we've got. If you're talking about your own neighborhood or your own city, you can say, there is a lovely old pub, or there is a museum. But naturally, I say, we've got. We've got a lovely old pub. We've got a great museum. We've got lots of lovely little cafes. I think especially if you're quite proud of your
That's what I was
neighborhood
going
or
to
you
say.
like it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I would say the
we've
same
got
thing.
it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like it's ours. We've got a lovely old pub. It's also great if you're making recommendations. If someone's coming to visit your neighborhood or your town and they want to know what to do, they, oh, well, we've got a great museum. We've got tours. We've got a river. We've got all these things. So yeah, if you want to talk about your neighborhood in a very positive way, we've got a lovely old pub around the corner. In the UK, there are pubs in almost every road these days, and that's less than before. A pub is often a place that serves beer and alcohol and sometimes food, and it's a very popular place to socialize and go to in the evenings. So I go there and I meet up with my mates. Here on High Level Listening, we try to give you casual spoken English that native speakers really use. That includes phrasal verbs. So you could say, I meet with my mates or meet with my friends. That's totally correct. Naturally, meet up with my mates. Meet up with my friends. I'm using meet up because it sounds a little bit more casual, a bit more friendly. There's maybe the implication that we traveled and walked to meet up. I came from my house, they came from their house to meet up. That's the only extra thing, but it just sounds more casual and friendly. So if you want to do that too, use a phrasal verb, meet up with my mates.
We have a few
Okay.
differences between the British English and American English here. So I would absolutely use meet up, just like Mark did. But when he's talking about a pub and when he's talking about his mates, these are two words that we probably wouldn't use as often in the United States. We'd probably meet up at the bar or restaurant. I think it's less common to just have a place, especially pubs are so great. You can meet in the afternoon. You could even get breakfast at some pubs. But I would say that in the United States, we'd meet up probably more likely at a cafe, or we might meet up at a brewery, which is becoming much more popular for sure. That's probably the closest thing. A brew pub, those are becoming more popular as well. We're even using that word. We meet up at restaurants, we meet up at a bar and restaurant, but it would be uncommon to just meet up at a bar in the middle of the day. Most of the time, those would be much later in the afternoon or even in the evening. And when we meet up with our mates, that's very British, and I would meet up with my friends. So, yeah, just a couple of the differences there.
All right, so what other places and things are near you in your neighborhood?
So, the local coffee shop is a short walk from my place. So, I like to stop in on the weekends to grab a coffee and catch up with friends. All right. So Mark is going to meet up with his friends, and I'm going to catch up with my friends. It is kind of interesting. Meet is fine to use, meet or meet up, but catch and catch up would mean something very different. Okay. If I'm going to catch my friends, then maybe we haven't talked in a while and it's hard for me to talk to them. Oh, I'm glad I caught you. Kind of like, oh, I caught you. I finally have a chance to talk to you. But if we're going to catch up with someone, then we're going to tell them all of the updates and news that we've been missing, right? So I would probably go to the local coffee shop for that. Local coffee shop because it's the United States. Coffee shops are everywhere. Now, if I said a local coffee shop, that could mean two different things. Close by my house, or it could mean that it's not kind of a big commercial coffee shop like Starbucks. Maybe it's privately owned, so it's going to be much smaller. Maybe the coffee is much nicer and things like that. So the local coffee shop, a local restaurant, a local bar, things like that. This could mean close to you, or it could also mean much smaller and locally owned, locally owned. So I like to stop in on the weekends. I like to stop in or stop by. If I stop in or stop by, then I'm usually going to go in quickly and another fast word, grab a coffee. So I like to stop in to my local coffee shop. I like to stop in and say hi to a friend. And sometimes I catch up with my friends too at the local coffee shop. All right, our next question. So, Mark, are you actually close to town? You call it town, right? Are you close to town?
Mhm. Yes, the high street is only a 10-minute bus ride away. So if I need to get some shopping in or pop into the post office or the bank, I can do it all in one trip. So previously, like Kat said, in England, you go to town or you go shopping in town, and that's the city centre. There's another phrase. The first words of that sentence were the high street. The high street is often the main street or the most central road in town. Often it's the longest one, sometimes it's the oldest one, and it's usually one that has bus stops, taxis, and lots of shops. It'll probably have a McDonald's, a KFC, and shopping centres and banks on it as well. It's all very central and it's all very convenient. You can walk down the high street and you can do a lot of things. You can go to the bank, you can get something to eat, there's probably pubs, and then you can catch the bus and go home. So the high street is often the main street of town. this is a phrase, again, that we only use in the UK, the high streets. It's also a very important reference point. If you get lost in a town in England, people will say, oh, well, go to the high street and you can find the bus stop there. Or all the taxis are waiting on the high street. So they will assume that you kind of know where it is. The good news is the high street is often called High Street. It says it on the sign. When you turn the corner, it'll say High Street.
Oh,
So yeah,
okay,
it's
that's
called that
helpful.
literally
I thought it
sometimes.
was,
Or
yeah, I thought it was called High Street. Like that was the name of the street, but I get now that it means it's like the main road, the High Street.
right?
Hmm.
Yeah, it's literally, it's both. It's the high street, like the main one, and it's called High Street. So if you go on
That
Google Maps, you can
makes
search
sense.
High
That makes sense.
Street. Yeah,
Okay, okay.
you could do like High Street Colchester, and it will take you to that,
Mm,
take you to the High Street.
right.
So another thing we can focus on is explaining how close or how far away things are. Kat used a good one in her sentence. She said, a short walk. The local coffee shop is a short walk from my place. So we measure a walk in short and long. A short walk could be 5 or 10 minutes. A long walk could be 20, 30 or more. So it's a short walk from my house. In my script, I said, the high street is only a 10-minute bus ride away. So I could say a short bus ride, a long bus ride, and I can count in minutes. And then I can use it like an adjective. A 10-minute bus ride, a 20-minute bus ride, a 1 hour or a 2 hour bus ride. Because it's an adjective, I don't put any S on minutes or hours. In English, we don't do plural adjectives, so it's a 10-minute bus ride. It's a 10-minute bus ride away. It's a short walk away. Those are useful phrases when you want to say where something is. And yes, I mentioned the high street is very convenient. If I need to get some shopping in or pop into the post office, means if I need to quickly visit the post office, if I need to pop into the post office or bank,
Like
I
that
can do it
phrase a
all
lot.
in one trip. Yeah,
Pop
that's what
in,
we've seen in a
pop
few other
in.
episodes. Pop in. Yes, just pop in 5 minutes, 10 minutes max. Pop into the supermarket and leave. Okay, so your suburb as well also sounds quite convenient. Are there any other things that are close by?
So, one thing that's great about my neighborhood is how close everything is. We've got a grocery store, a couple of restaurants, and even a farmer's market on Saturdays, all within walking distance. Now, I'll be honest, that's not that typical for an American suburb to be able to have things within walking distance. That's a little bit crazy because we are so car centric in the United States, which means that everything we do revolves around having a car. If you live in the suburbs, it's almost guaranteed that you would have a car because most people will commute into town. Most people will commute into the city. They need to drive their car in order to live in a house in the suburbs. You need to work a well-paying job in the city center. So that would be pretty common to have a car. So it really is nice that I have all of these things and we can say within walking distance. Now, every American is a little bit different. Within walking distance for some people means 10 to 15 minutes max. But some people in New York say, oh, an hour? Yeah, that's within walking distance. Okay. Okay. Within an hour, maybe. Okay. Now, for people who live in a suburb and have access to their cars, probably more likely that within walking distance means 10 to 15 minutes, maybe 20, maybe 20. I think that's probably more accurate for
When he's pushing it, I
suburban
feel like.
families. Yeah, exactly. So one thing that's great about my neighborhood is how close everything is. Okay. So I'm not asking a question, right? I'm not saying, oh, how close is everything? No, I'm just saying that it's great. And what's great about it is how close everything is. We've got a grocery store. There we go. That's exactly what Mark said. We've got, oh, I'm so proud of this. Look at me within walking distance. We've got a grocery store, a couple of restaurants, and even a farmer's market on Saturdays. So when I say we've got, I could list a few things. There's this, there's that, there's this, there's that. But yeah, no, this is kind of special. Look at all the things I have in my neighborhood, right? So we've got a grocery store. Grocery store is similar to supermarket. I more often say grocery store, and that can be big or small. Yeah, I would definitely, if you can find fruits, vegetables, meat, food, plus other things like sometimes clothing, sometimes household products and things like that, that would be a grocery store for me. A couple of restaurants, and even a farmer's market. A farmer's market is really great because the farmers from town bring in their fresh fruit, fresh produce, fresh items, and they're usually local, which means that you're supporting your neighborhood, you're supporting people in your neighborhood, which helps as well. So there's even a farmer's market on Saturdays, all within walking distance. That means I can walk to these places and do my shopping pretty quickly. So, do you like the area that you live in, Mark?
Yes, well, one of my favourite things is that there's loads of local shops around, like a little bakery down the road that sells really lovely bread, a few cafes, and even a butcher's that has local ingredients. So another quite British phrase, there's loads of local shops around. Loads. There's loads, there's lots of. I can say there are lots of local shops around. More commonly, even if it's breaking a grammar rule, there is loads of
Hmm.
local shops around. We've had some questions about that in the comments before, saying there is lots of. This is
Hmm.
probably a grammar rule that native speakers break without even
Yes.
thinking. There's these, there is those. Very often we'll use there is. We know it's wrong, but we still do it. So there's loads of local shops
It's
around.
I think it's because we're pushing those words together, and to say there are, we'd probably say there. And
Right?
because we're shoving them together, it doesn't sound as nice. So there's plenty, there's loads, there's lots. Yeah, that absolutely, for
Hmm.
sure. I would break that rule as well in the same way.
Right. It's a lot easier to say there's loads than there are loads. It's
Yeah,
just,
there are loads,
yeah, I'm being
especially
lazy.
for American R. There are loads.
Right. Yeah, sure. So, yeah, for me, there's loads of local shops around. Kat's already explained local, like a little bakery down the road.
Precious.
Down the road is a good phrase to explain where something is. It's just down the road. Most of the time, we'll say down the road. You can say up the road, and it's basically the same meaning. It's a little bakery down the road that sells really lovely bread, a few cafes, and even a butcher's. A butcher's is a store that sells meat. Often they have the raw meat, like a whole pig, and they will cut it up for you. They will give you as much as you like. You can even get some parts of the animal that you can't find in a supermarket, like organs and liver. I have some students who have dogs and they go to the butcher's and they ask for the pieces that humans don't eat and give it to their dogs. So you can go to a butcher's, and the butcher's has local ingredients. So the ingredients came from nearby. They definitely came from England, and they probably came from the next village, or they came from the next town, or they came from a farm close by. So it's local. All right, back to you, Kat. Back to the suburbs. Do you feel like it's a convenient place to live in?
Yeah, it's nice to live somewhere so convenient, especially when I want to avoid driving. Now, most Americans drive all the time. Even in some of my friends' neighborhoods, they don't have a restaurant close by or within walking distance. They definitely don't have a grocery store within walking distance. Everything they do, they hop in their car and drive to this place. So for me, it's nice to live somewhere so convenient, especially when I want to avoid driving. You know, Americans drive all day. We drive to work, we commute to work, we drive home. It We drive our kids to school, we drop our kids off, we take them to their classes, we drive all the time. And sometimes just don't want to get in the car. I just want a little exercise, a little fresh air. So it is really nice, and it's nice to live somewhere so convenient if I want to avoid driving, okay? Avoid driving. My cousins live in a place where their mom my aunt walks them to school. And she says, wow, this is a huge change from where I used to live. They used to drive about 15, 20 minutes every morning, every afternoon to drop the kids off. So it's so nice for them to live somewhere so convenient when they want to avoid driving and just go walk instead. So, Mark, what about your neighbors? I know that's a big plus for me to have good neighbors. Do you know your neighbors that well?
We know our neighbours on both sides really well. We even chat when we're out in the garden. So yes, we're talking about neighbourhoods. So of course, we have to talk about neighbours. Your neighbours are the people who live next to you or who also live in the neighbourhood. Very commonly, you can talk about your next door neighbour, especially if we're living in a terraced house or in houses. Not apartments, but in houses where you have neighbours on your left and on your right, then your next door neighbour, your next door neighbour. It doesn't matter if it's left or right. You just say, they're my next door neighbour. So you can say my next door neighbour's on the left, or my next door neighbour's on the right, or just refer to them as my next door neighbours. So in my sentence, we know our neighbours on both sides. Remember, in England, we're in a terraced house, so your walls are connected. The good news is the houses are smaller and cheaper. The bad news is the walls are connected, so you can kind of hear your neighbours through the wall. Sometimes you can hear them going up and down the stairs, or if they have a dog or a pet that's barking, you can sometimes hear that. Not all the time, but you'll get to know your neighbours quite well in a terraced house. But we know them very well. I know their names. I know what they do. Maybe we've chatted when we're out in the garden. Again, British houses, or terraced houses in particular, are narrow but very deep. And at the back of the house, you might have a long, narrow garden. In England, it's very common for people to wash their clothes or do their washing and then hang it on a line in the garden. So it's quite common on a sunny day that two neighbours will both go out and hang up their clean clothes at the same time. And the other thing about the gardens in England is that the fences are kind of low. They're
Yeah.
not super tall. So you can actually see 2, 3, or 4 gardens down the road. Sometimes you see your neighbour, and it's polite to give a little wave. Or if you're like my mum, especially, she will stop and have a chat over the fence. And sometimes it can be 5 minutes, sometimes it can be half an hour, just chatting over the fence. So if we're both out in the garden, outside and in the garden, we will chat. And yeah, my mum and myself have a very good relationship with neighbours on both sides because we interact quite often. And again, because the walls are connected, you're always aware of your neighbours. You definitely still have privacy and quiet, but you always know that your neighbours are home. You can hear when they come in. You can hear when they go out as well. So I think that builds quite a strong sense of community, which I quite like. All right, back to you. What about your neighbours? Are they friendly? Do you know them well?
Well, yeah, of course. I can always count on friendly neighbors waving hello as I walk by. It really feels like a close-knit community where everyone looks out for each other. So, if you can count on something, that means you know it's going to happen. So, I can really count on someone. I really trust them. I can always count on friendly neighbors waving hello as I walk by. If you are in an American suburb and you're just walking down the road or you're walking down the sidewalk or the little walking path in the middle of the community park, you'll always say hi. Always. Americans, absolutely. Good morning. Hi, how's it going? Hi, how you doing? Hey, good morning. Hi, good morning. Hi, nice to see you. Good morning. So this is common in the office. This is common walking around in the park, common dropping your kids off at school. Even if they are strangers, you'll probably still at least give a little hello or hi. If you're walking your dog and you see someone else walking their dog, 100%. Oh, what's your dog's name? Hi, good morning. How's it going? They act like you know each other. You don't. You're just strangers. You might be
So let's say
hiking on a walking trail. Yep.
it's not an invitation to actually chat, right?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
just like
It's just
a
polite.
phrase.
It's just
Mm.
polite. Hiya. Hiya. Hi, good morning. You might even do a little, we do something that's like, oh yeah, hi. A little hi. We don't have to wave unless we know each other, right? But for me, I can always count on friendly neighbors waving hello. So, hi, Kat. Hey, how's it going? Now, it's funny. It's almost like my tone of voice. If I said, hi, how's it going? Hi, how's it going? I'm not stomping you. Hey, how's it going? That is an invitation to talk. Isn't that kind of interesting? How's it
Oh,
going?
yeah.
Yeah, how's it going? Hey, how's it going? How are you? Not an invitation to talk. Hey, how are you? Invitation to
But you're
talk.
expecting an answer. Yeah.
I know, I know. Now, of course, strangers are not going to expect you to stop and talk. I think that if they do, it would be a little surprising even to me, who I'm used to chatting with my neighbors. But some people might want to, who knows? It really feels like a close knit community, close knit. Now, when you knit something like a sweater, you closely knit it together. So if we are a close knit community, we depend on each other, we help each other in times of need, and everyone looks out for each other. Okay. Like Mark said, you know when people are home and you know when you know people's schedules. So if something kind of weird is going on, everything okay? Mm, hmm. Okay. So if you're looking out for each other, maybe your car is not parked in the driveway, but your kids are coming home from school, and you think, well, where's mom? Everything okay? Hi guys. You know, we're neighbors. I know you. Everything okay? Where's your mom? Oh, okay. She's here. Good. The car's in the shop. Great, great. Just making sure. Just making sure. Sometimes it can be a little nosy, right? A little nosy, but for the most part, people are very friendly and they just want to make sure the kids are okay, you're okay, nothing weird is going on. Everybody's just living their life. So they are looking out for each other for sure. All right, Mark, any final thoughts on the area that you live in?
All in all, it feels like there's a proper sense of community, which is something I really appreciate. So, yes, Kat mentioned a close knit community. In my neighborhood, there is a proper sense of community. Sense here means like a feeling. I feel like there is a community and everybody else feels it too. There's a proper sense of community, and that's reflected in their behavior. I think people help each other, especially during COVID. There was, I think, the community in the neighborhood got a lot stronger. We started a WhatsApp group or a Facebook messaging group, and our neighbors were chatting to each other. And every time one of them went to the supermarket, they asked, does anyone need milk, tea bags, anything essential for British people? And people would say, yes, can I have some tea bags, please? And they would buy them at the supermarket and then leave them on the doorstep in front of the door for them. So that's something like a real community. That's a sense of community. If somebody is away for a few days and they have pets, they can ask one of the neighbors to come over and feed their dog or feed their cat just for a couple of days. That's a sense of community. Or, true story, when I was at my mum's house, I was teaching a class, and apparently there was a problem with the bathroom. There was a problem with the toilet. It kept filling up with water and spilling over. And our neighbor from 3 houses down, he saw like water coming out of the back of our house. He came into the house, he opened the gate, and he went upstairs and he fixed the toilet. he went back downstairs and went home. And I finished my lesson and I was like, oh, what happened to the bathroom? And I didn't know. And then a few days later, I bumped into the neighbor and he told me, oh, yeah, I fixed the problem with your bathroom the other day. And I was like, that was you? And he's like, yeah, I just came in and fixed it. Is it
And we don't
okay?
do that
Like,
in the United States.
yeah, right. I was like, wow. I
We
mean, that's so nice.
that is that
But
is a that is a very quick way to get in trouble is to enter someone's home
in
without being
Texas,
asked
maybe, yeah,
to.
right, yeah,
I mean,
sure.
no, I that's very cute and British of you, but that is no, we would knock at the door, we would call and
Mm.
text. If it were an emergency, yes, okay, but not for a leaking toilet. No, for sure.
Okay,
No.
fair.
Don't
Well,
do
yeah, well,
that in the United
that's
States.
the kind of it's the kind of community you can get in the UK.
Yeah.
Also, yeah, my mum's neighbor, she's had broken furniture in the past, and her neighbor came over and fixed it for her. Just little gestures like that are really nice. That's a proper sense of community. I enjoy
Mm,
it. I know that's
I
quite
mean,
different and maybe
yeah.
not acceptable in other countries, but I think that's nice.
Okay, so there you have it. Some useful, authentic, and a little bit different, but definitely naturally spoken English to help you talk about your neighborhood in high level English. So, why not try out some of these phrases and describe your own neighborhood with us in the comments? We'd love to hear more about where you live and what it's like. So, let us know down below in the comments.
Yes, absolutely. What was your favorite expression mentioned in today's episode? Did you like the sound of Cat's Neighborhood more or mine? Don't forget, like always, you can get a PDF transcript of this episode as well, and all the original scripts from our other episodes as well. You can take them offline. You can study them however you like if you become a High Level Listening member. Like always, the link is in the description below.
Thanks so much, everyone. We'll see you again for another episode really soon.
Bye bye.